Unmuted.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order. Today is February 7th, Friday. It's 1:01 p.m. We're scheduled from 1 to 2 p.m. This is a work session regarding a discussion with Jacqueline Hendricks, the Inspector General of the Columbus Civilian Police Review Board. This work session was requested by our friends of the Alaska Black Caucus. We'll start with introductions. Mr. Salt.
Randy Salt here. Daniel Bullen.
Mark Littlefield.
Karen Brongut.
Zach Johnson.
Christopher Constant.
Felix Severa.
Anna Brawley.
On the phone, we have Mr. Martinez. Are you there? All right. If you are there, speak up when you get a chance. Also, for the visitors, the microphones work. You press the button and then you just let it go. The green light should go on, and then you speak. And then when you're done, interference in our phone system, and everything's recorded. Just so you know, it's a public meeting, it's streaming on the internet, and the stream will be available. So we'll go ahead and let you introduce this, Miss Hodge-Grouden.
So hello, everyone. I'm Celeste Hodge-Grouden, President and CEO of the Alaska Black Caucus. We really appreciate this opportunity to be here as part of this discussion and the work session. And I just want to give a shout out to our chair of the Justice Committee, Rich Kurtner, for really making all of this possible. And so thank you again for this opportunity.
All right. And Ms. Hendricks. Oh, okay, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Mary Younger, and I am a member of the Police Civilian Review Board in Columbus, Ohio. And Ms. Hendricks is a member of she's the head of the Inspector General's office. I'm going to be speaking first, and I'm going to be speaking very briefly. So, I'm going to give you a basic overview. So the first question here, I've got basically, what I did was I organized 5 questions that I thought people might want to know. And the first thing is, how did this board originate? Why did we in Columbus, Ohio, think that it was necessary to have a civilian police review board? Well, it started in 2018. Our mayor, Mayor Ginther, organized a Columbus Community Safety Advisory Commission. He wanted the entire police department reviewed. He wanted everything reviewed to see what are we doing and what do we need to do. This advisory commission worked for 18 months. They reviewed all aspects of the Columbus Police Department. They researched, they interviewed experts, outside experts, inside experts. They reviewed statistics from all police departments across the country, as many as they could, police departments across the country, and they came up with 80 recommendations for our mayor. Recommendations 70 and 71 were for a police civilian review board and an independent inspector general's office. And that's how we came to be. Really, what's also important is other recommendations they came up with were de-escalation techniques, officer wellness. We have now a beautiful new building where it's an officer wellness center where officers can go for mental health purposes, rehabilitation purposes, all sorts of things. But it concentrates on the officer also. So it's recruitment techniques, retention techniques, diversity training, retention of officers, diverse officers. So it was all encompassing, and we have a different police department than we had in the past. It's not perfect, but we're really working there. So that started. That's how we got started. Then the mayor and city council put on the ballot to our citizens, do you want, in November of that year, do you want to have a civilian review board? The citizens voted by 76% that they wanted this Police Review Board. In December, since they wanted it, then he established a work group. This work group worked on things like how many members do we want on this board? What do we want the IG's office to look like? Do we want the board to be paid? Do we want them to be volunteers? What do we want it to look like? So they worked the nuts and bolts of this particular board. So after this work group put it together, then in April of 2021, the first board came to fruition. So it took a little time to put it all together. So at that point, the board came to fruition, and it took approximately 3 years. What does it look like now? My second question is, now that we're there, after looking back and seeing all this that took place, it's really one heck of a gift to the people of Columbus, Ohio. After looking back at it, and seeing the reactions of the officers, I'll address that in a few minutes, even the officers themselves and the benefits. What does the board look like, and what can it do? The board makes recommendations after the IG does their work and we do our work. They make recommendations to the chief of police and to the safety director as to what they have found. We do not discipline. That's within the purview of the chief of police and the safety director. So what do we look like? First of all, where does our authority come from? It comes from the city charter, and Ms. Hendricks will get into that. But there are 11 of us, and our first board is very diverse. For example, me, this will be going on my 4th year. And we have 3 years, and then we can renew for 3 more years, and then we're finished, unless we seek to come back after that first 3 years. But really, the way I feel, other citizens should serve. So it's a 6-year term. I come from a background. I retired from the Franklin County Public Defender's Office. So I did criminal defense work for 36 years. I loved every second of it. There were 2 pastors there. One finished his term. There's another one on there. The most important person, we don't have one on there because he finished, was a retired police officer. What he gave us was invaluable because he had a different perspective. He gave us what we needed, things that we didn't look at sometimes. And so it's good to have total diversity on that board. And that's what it's really also in the charter. You need LGBTQ, you need old people, senior, you need old people like me. I mean, you need, I don't even, you have to really, we delineated in the charter and in our rules and regulations, what's everything to make sure that everyone is there and everyone has a voice. Also, we have an attorney that advises us, and the Inspector General has an attorney also that advises them. Make sure, the training, that's so important. We went through so much training. It's so important that the board members are trained. And I think the most important training that I received was, we went out to the police academy. We had ride-alongs with the officer. But the most important training was the role playing at the police academy. Even though it's role playing, it's really something when you're given a situation and you're put in that situation that the officer is put in, and then you have to figure out, well, what is it that you're going to do? You walk into a room and there's something going on, and you have to think of, well, how is it that you're going to react when there's a domestic violence, or there's some sort of a mental health situation going on. So it puts you in that, and you really need to do these things. So we were trained in constitutional law, diversity bias, police tactics, all these things. And the board needs to be trained. So that's number two. Then the third thing that I thought was important, why did I want to be on this board? And I thought about this for even before the trade, they put it out for everybody. We had to apply for it, and it was a long process to get on here. But it's important because I wanted to be on the board because I have a lot of respect for law enforcement, and I think that the public has to have a place that's separate from the police department, that's separate from internal affairs, to go and be able to have their, whatever the complaint, whatever the issue might be, to have it aired, to have it reviewed. And the officers themselves have to have a place to go. And the most important thing that I've seen so far reviewing these complaints is that now that we have body cameras, you'll have a complaint come in, and then the Inspector General does her investigation. She reviews the body cameras, and then they interview the witnesses, and it's nothing like the complaint. And the officer had absolutely no recourse, but with this review, after we've reviewed it, he or she is protected because we've done an investigation, and it's nothing like the complaints. The person told a falsehood. So the good officers welcome civilian oversight because it gives them credibility in the community, and it gives them an outlet, and then it protects them. And we've been out in the community to let people know how you file a complaint. And we've been approached by law enforcement, and they are glad to have us there because one officer said, it gives us it gives us more credibility with the community because and that's more transparency, and even the cameras do, and you guys do, and that's how he saw it. Let's see. I think I think it's at this point, Ms. Hendricks with the Inspector General. I think I've forgotten half of it, but.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. Just briefly giving a little bit of a background about myself. I have over something like 30-something years, almost telling my age, over 37 years of law enforcement background in criminal justice, retired law enforcement officer with the city of Detroit, retired and worked 10 years for the Office of Inspector General for the city of Detroit before I came aboard as the Inspector General for the city of Columbus. So my agenda is going to pretty much go over who we are, what we do, a little bit about the city charter, city code, how to file a complaint, the process and investigations. And then I do want to turn a little bit of it back over to Board Member Younger, who's going to talk about some of the accomplishments that we've had. There's so much information we would love to provide because there's so much that we've been doing over the last 3 years. But what we're going to try to do is just touch on bases that we feel are very important, that we think the board and other members of the assembly would want to hear. So who are we? Pretty much like we were told you in 2020, it was overwhelmingly voted by the city of Columbus to have the Department of Inspector General and the Civilian Review Board. It was put in the charter. It's so important to have information if you're going to create a charter, or if you're going to create a Civilian Review Board and Department of Inspector General, to have all of that locked into a charter that gives you the jurisdiction, it gives you the duty, it explains exactly what you're able to do. Although we are two separate entities, we work in tandem together. The Department of Inspector General is the investigative agency for the Civilian Review Board. The Civilian Review Board is composed of members of the community, and there are volunteer members. So the charter tells you that the Civilian Review Board shall be comprised of an odd number of members, the majority of which will constitute the quorum. The members shall be representatives of the community. It's so important that the board represents the community. And it tells you, I love the fact that it's in the charter, based on race, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity. It goes into social economic status and your general region. The charter also tells you a little bit more what duties does the board have. So the board has a duty that they shall receive and initiate and cause investigation of complaints filed with the Department of Inspector General or complaints filed with the Civilian Review Board. What the board has the ability to do also is provide recommendations to the Division of Police based on the complaints that we receive, based on the complaints that are investigated. And if facts warranted, and we find that the complaints involve officers having some type of misconduct, then they have the ability to provide recommendations to the Chief of Police regarding any disciplinary actions that need to occur. When it talks about the city code, the thing I love too is not just in the city code, not just in the charter, but also the city code defines what and delineates what responsibilities and what jurisdictions, again, the board has, along with what the Department of Inspector General has. And again, as you can see, pretty much the same. Just kind of additional things they put in there is make recommendations to the Chief of Police and the Director of Public Safety. Also evaluate and identify complaint patterns. So you're also looking at the complaints that are filed, what are some of the patterns, and also making recommendations regarding policy and procedure, because you may find that some of the investigations that we're looking at, maybe the officers are following policy and procedures, and maybe those policies and procedures may not just be conducive to the interactions that officers are having with citizens. So you want to be able to have that ability to do that also. Again, the charter goes back and it defines what the Department of Inspector General is, and it tells you it will consist of an Inspector General, one or more investigator, administrative support staff, and the Civilian Review Board. It also tells you that the Inspector General is appointed by 2/3 of the Civilian Review Board and confirmed by the mayor. The Department of Inspector General is a city agency. And with that, it tells you that it also has to be confirmed by the mayor. But the Department of Inspector General is independent. It is independent of public safety. And the Inspector General serves under the guidance of the Civilian Review Board. What are the distinct roles between the Civilian Review Board and the Department of Inspector General? So when you look at what the Civilian Review Board does, the Civilian Review Board, again, is a representation of the community. What they do is they review the investigations that the Department of Inspector General does, provides these investigations to the board to review. And based on the recommendations that come from the investigations, they will either agree with the recommendations, and they can make additional recommendations. And so with that, they also take those investigations, the board votes on that. Those investigations then are submitted to public safety or the chief of police regarding what their findings are based on the complaints. And with those investigations, they also have the ability to not only make recommendations for discipline, but also if they're looking at policy and procedure, if they're looking at patterns, they make the recommendations to the chief of police. They make the recommendations going forward. The other thing that the board has the ability to do is with their reviewing an investigation that is done by the department, and they have some questions, they get to say, what are those questions? They also, all of the information in the report that we file, that we put in the report to provide to the board, if the board needs additional information, they can conduct a hearing in which they can require not just our office, but if they want information from the officers to come, they can do that. I can tell you within our policy that we have established is that the board has the ability, we usually ask them 2 weeks prior to the meeting that they have, if they have any questions, to present those questions to us so that we can provide them with answers. Also, any information, evidence we looked at could also include body cam. If they want to come and review that, because maybe when they're reading the report, they have some additional questions, they can actually present that. They can actually provide us with those questions, and we will in-house provide a place for them to come and review that information. The goal that you're going to find, and I hope that you're getting from this presentation, is that the Department of Inspector General is very supportive. We want to make sure that when we provide all that information to the Civilian Review Board, that they're able to do their job. They're able to read their report, and if they have any questions, we want to make sure that we're able to answer that questions. Strictly because the board meets once a month, and they're reviewing the reports that we provide. The Department of Inspector General, again, it being a city agency, we are Monday through Friday, 5-day-a-week operation. We're employing investigators that are doing the work that we need to do to provide all of that information to the Civilian Review Board for them to be able to make the decisions. That's very important for them to make. Independent, again, I kind of went over that, but just putting some distinction between the department and the Civilian Review Board. The Civilian Review Board does not have the ability to conduct investigations. That lies strictly with the Department of Inspector General. So that tells you a little bit what our distinct goals are. But the Inspector General, the investigations we do, we don't have the ability to finalize what our findings are and stuff and submit that to the Police Review Board. I mean, we don't have the ability to finalize our investigations and make recommendations directly to the chief. They go to the board, we provide them with all that information, and the board votes and makes their decisions, and the board provides all of that information to the chief of police. And it tells you recommendations can be related to resolving complaints, suggested disciplinary actions, policies and procedures, and again, the board as a whole. So citizens are able to file complaints and we investigate that. The board as a whole also has the ability, if they see something that is going on out there, the board as a whole can vote and file a complaint themselves and submit that to the Department of Inspector General for the Department of Inspector General to investigate that. So I want to kind of back up when it says disciplinary actions. You've heard us say that we don't issue the disciplinary actions. And so a question would be, okay, so who does? We know that most agencies have a collective bargaining agreement that the city has with their police department. And so discipline is always based on the collective bargaining agreement. So understanding that the investigations that are done, if you find that the officer's actions did violate a policy and procedure, the suggestion that is forwarded to the chief of police is always going to be, here's the policy. The officer violated this policy. So the suggestion is always that they be disciplined in accordance with the collective bargaining agreement, because as the chief of police, that normally is how officers are disciplined. And we also know that there are times that chiefs of police may dismiss an officer, maybe not within a collective bargaining agreement, and there are grievances in process. But again, this is the process. Some people might say, well, how do we know the chief is going to do exactly what is recommended? Well, the thing of it is when you're doing an investigation and you find that the officer's actions violated a policy and procedure, it's a violation. And the collective bargaining is there to state that when violations occur, there is a process by how officers are supposed to be disciplined. How do you file a complaint? There are so many ways that our department accepts complaints. Website, got a hotline, QR code, email, walk-in, mails. The board, again, I state, meets the first Tuesday of every month. Someone can show up at the board meeting and want to file a complaint, and they can do that. The process. So it's understanding the process of how we process complaints. Complaints that come in are filed by citizens. Understanding, again, we investigate misconduct involving officers with the Columbus Division of Police. That is our only jurisdiction. We don't have jurisdiction outside to investigate other law enforcement officers. What is misconduct? Misconduct is any interaction that an officer does that is a violation of their own policy and procedure, along with city policy and procedure, and along with law. This is what is considered misconduct. So a citizen may file a complaint. Once we get that complaint, we look at the complaint to make a determination whether we have enough information to investigate it. Unfortunately, there are times that we get complaints through our hotlines and there's not enough information. We do reach out and try to get as much information as we can to make a determination whether that falls within our jurisdiction to investigate that complaint. Once we're able to make that determination, then an investigation is initiated. The investigation is initiated, and once it occurs, we look at a lot of evidence. I mean, giving you an example, body cam, CAD reports, which is a computerized digitized report. We will pull police runs to see the run that the officer got, any type of documents, use of force documents, arrest reports, all that information, along with the fact that my investigators have the ability to review body cam. We look at all that information. Based on that, that is part of our investigation. We prepare a report. That report goes to the board, and it says, boom, here is the complaint. This is what we're looking at. We either will state that they violated policy or procedure or they didn't. We give them the policy that we're looking at, what was the steps that the officer should have taken, what steps were missed, and if the officer violated a policy, what that policy violation was. There are times that officers don't violate policy. We still have the report. It still gives all of that information to the board members for them to be able to review that information. And it states, after the investigation is done, the report is submitted to the board for their final review. During the board meeting, the board will meet, they will discuss it, and they'll make a decision. Mary may comment, I'll let her comment a little bit more. I know the board has separate committees, so when the reports go to them, they separate into committees, they review that, and then when they come back to the committee, back to the board members, they discuss that. And again, if they have any questions, they do reach out to us and we do answer any questions that they have. There are times that they, again, come in-house and they're able to review the body cam. If they have questions, we'll have an investigator who is investigating that report there so that they get a chance to ask any questions. Again, the goal is to make sure that as the board members are making a decision, that all of the information that was done and conducted is provided to them to be able to make that very important decision that they have to make. The determination of the outcome. So the process for the city, some agencies will have processes different, but our process is locked into the collective bargaining agreement that the city has with the FOP, Fraternal Order of Police, with the City of Columbus. So part of our collective bargaining is once those reports have been reviewed by the board, that they go to the chief of police, and those reports go to the chain of command, because the chain of command wants to review what the findings are and what the recommendations are. The board does have the ability, if there's a finding that our office does and that the board disagrees, they also have the ability to say, hey, they disagree. And there are going to be times that the board will disagree. Our investigations, I will tell you, are all based on policies and procedures. But again, the board is going to tell you there's just some policies out there that maybe the investigation found the officer stuck with the policy, but the board was like, we don't like that policy. And you're going to find some recommendations when we go into some things that they've accomplished. The board is going to share some things that they disagreed with. And so having that discussion with the chief has moved forward with the chief revising some policies, looking at some things and making some additional things. And you'll see that. So again, all those investigations go to the chain of command. The chain of command will review those. And when the chain of command is done, those findings come back to our office and it will say whether they agreed or disagreed. What I will tell you is we have been in operation. I got appointed in 2022, right? I got appointed in 2022. There was no office. I put that office together from scratch with the staff that we have. And so we have been in operation for over 2.5 years. Yes. So one thing I just wanted to note is that the investigations that have been reviewed by CPD up to this date, they have agreed with 96% of all of the findings that we have submitted. And that includes the findings of sustaining officers for misconduct and taking some type of action.
Right, we do have a number of questions. I don't know if you want to get there or you want to go through more slides.
No, we're just about
Okay,
done. So,
go ahead.
and just one other thing, and then I'll go right into the questions because we wanted to make sure that we were pacing ourselves to be able to be finished and leave at least a good 30 minutes for questions. One thing that's important, and so I want to be able to say that too, is that based on a collective bargaining agreement, we can only investigate allegations that have occurred within 90 days. That's part. So if it has occurred within 90 days, they can file a complaint with our office. Anything outside the 90 days, we can't investigate it. Also, based on a collective bargaining agreement, we have 90 days to conduct our investigations. So I want you to know that we have been very, there's always exceptions and we can ask for extensions, but those are the guidelines that my office works with, the constraints we work within. And even with those constraints that we work within, wanting you to know that CPD has still agreed with 90% of the investigations that we have. So I'm just gonna go pass through and so there's some accomplishments. I'll let Mary just tad bit tell you some of the accomplishments we've had, and then definitely again some questions.
I'm just gonna skip down here. One of the biggest policy change is that, one of the biggest policy changes that for special duty officers did not have body cameras. And we started doing cases, and it was without those body cameras, that is a real gift. And it's just not just a gift for citizens, it's a gift for the officer. And we were reviewing cases, and without those body cameras, it's the citizen and the officer. And really it was, we lacked something, but now, so what's changed? Because we have the Civilian Review Board, they've put in their, they're getting funds. They're asking for funds, and now when officers are working special duty or at one of the grocery stores, et cetera, they're going to be getting body cameras. And that is, and so when officers go and work, they know they're doing their job. They've got those cameras on. If somebody causes a ruckus, gets in, they're protected. So, I mean, I just can't see the number of times that an officer has been protected because of the Police Civilian Review Board and those body cams is unbelievable. So that's, I think that's all I want to say. I'm going to stop right here. So for the questions.
All right,
we don't
we
need
have
anything else. Thank
definitely
you. Thank you.
some room for questions. This is where the good part begins. Presentation was great,
Okay.
but this is where rubber meets the road. So, Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate the presentation, and then the annual report also had some good information in it, so I encourage folks to read that. So I guess just a little bit of context. I'm not sure how aware you all are of the conversations that we've been having here around community and civilian oversight. Certainly, they've been discussions that we've been having, and we did attempt to move forward with a particular contractor, which you may or may not be familiar with, NACOL, to try to get them to work with us. That didn't happen, but the conversation continues. So I guess first thing is, so there's been quite a bit of discussions around subpoena powers, and since this is an IG system, I'm assuming that you don't necessarily need subpoena powers, or could you just expand on that? And did that, if subpoena powers were part of the voter discussion, if someone could just talk a little bit about how that all played out?
Oh, you want to start?
Well,
Go ahead.
I'll just start saying with our office, the charter gives us the ability to request all documents that we need to do our investigations. So we don't really need subpoena power for that because we're able to get all of that information. And in the beginning, we work with the police department to find things that, because we're administrative, And what you're going to find is police department being law enforcement, there are certain things that are particular about what they're able to do and not. And so one of the things for us to be able to review body footage, we had to get CJIS certified. The board is not, which is not a problem because we're still able to get that information we provided to the board. And if there's something that the board wants to look at on body cam, we just do a public records request and we'll have that information for the board. And I'll let Mary speak with you regarding the subpoena power.
At first,
The microphone again. Yep.
At first, it seemed like it was going to be a big deal. We have to have subpoena power. We have to be able to get all these records. But the Inspector General is able, working with the police department, they're able to get everything that we need. And the police officers are interviewed, and they're per the FOP contract, they have a representative with them. So they are, when they're interviewed, there's a fraternal or police individual in the room with them when they're interviewed, if they want one. And I don't think one officer has they all agree to be interviewed because they want to speak they want to come in and say what happened. There's body cam there, and if there isn't body cam, they want to tell their side of the story. So we've had, and Jacqueline would be more apt to speak to this because they do the investigations, but we have no problem with body cams at all. Yeah, don't make it a point of contention because it really isn't.
Most of the time, what I'll tell you is police agencies have some type of, if they don't have police oversight, they have internal affairs. And so they conduct citizen complaints, and it is in their collective bargaining agreement, that process. What happens is that process, based on the city charter and whatever the city makes agreement, will just fold over to the Department of Inspector General, however you guys word that. So when Internal Affairs was doing that investigation, all of those rights just came right over to us.
Great, thanks. One more question, then I'll yield back. So, as I understand your process, you conduct the investigation, and that is submitted to the police department chain of command, and then the police department chain of command, and particularly the police chief, gets to decide whether there are disciplinary actions taken or not based off of your investigation. Is that accurate? Generally speaking?
A little bit. So our investigations go to the Civilian Review Board. Okay, they're voted on by the Civilian Review Board, and they make a recommendation, and then they do go to the chief of police. And to your question, the disciplinary does fall up under the chief. What I will always state, and this is with most Inspector General offices, whether you do police oversight or fraud, waste, abuse, and corruption, once you are able to find a violation, the people have a voice. So even if the chief decided, oh, okay, well, I don't want to discipline, it's going to be very, very hard when you have a report that is publicized that said, hey, your officers violated this policy. Here's what the policy says. Your officers didn't do that.
Yeah, and actually, thanks for that. That was going to be the crux of my question: is how do both residents and police officers react to the reports?
What I can tell you is the reports that we do, they're fact-based. They're all based on fact. They're not opinionated. And so what I can tell you is in the beginning, yes, coming aboard, there's always that thing about how change is going to be. So it's just important that the system, and as it's set up, and the information that you're providing, it's just very clear. All of our reports that we put in there, we interview the officer, we ask regarding the actions that they took. We quote what the policy states the action should have been taking and whether or not the officer violated. Good example is CPD policy requires that if officers have an investigative interaction with the citizens, they have to activate their body cam. And there are times officers have not done that. And we bring them in and say, hey, were you supposed to do this? You didn't do this. They'll either say, they will explain. Some might say it was a malfunction. Some say, yeah, I was supposed to, I didn't. That's a violation. And so when we find that and we send it through, we don't really get a kickback. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to point out important that 96% of the investigations that we do, that we have submitted through over to the chain, have been, CPD has agreed. And there's a grievance process. And that's with most law enforcement agencies. There's going to be a grievance that if they disagree, they can just grievance.
I assume you have more questions,
Yeah.
so we'll put you back in the queue. Next we have Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. And as somebody also from Columbus, Ohio, welcome. We were talking a little bit earlier. So my two questions, well, one of them you actually answered, which was kind of when or what circumstances does the board initiate work as opposed to responding or receiving? And you covered that, I think, already. My other two questions, despite having grown up there, I'm not super familiar with Columbus's local government structure. But I'm wondering, so in our city, we have the ombudsman. I know we're not unique in that, but I was just curious because the ombudsman, not specific to police work, but generally performs, I think, what the IG's office does in the sense of receiving citizen complaints, investigating, and being held separate from the departments that they're investigating or responding to. So I was just curious, does the city of Columbus have an ombudsman or a kind of general function like that? Or I guess, where does your office sit in that structure is the first question. And I guess I'll do that. And then I have a second question. Thanks.
I want to say I believe that we do have an ombudsman. I'm pretty sure we do. I think we do. Yeah. But the authority to investigate citizen complaints involving misconduct for the Columbus Division of Police rests solely with my office. And so other agencies that get that, even Internal Affairs has gotten complaints. Those complaints come to our office for investigation. No other agency can conduct those investigations but our office.
Thank you. Yeah, and I know you have a very specific function. My other question is looking at the composition of your board, and I was reading the language around having diverse representation. And I'm curious, and you mentioned some of the folks, you obviously, Ms. Younger, have a lot of experience in this world, and others you mentioned. Thinking about kind of balancing the need to have broad general public representation, truly community representation, with the fact that what you're dealing with is a very specialized area is what I'm hearing. I guess, how does that get balanced with who is on the board? Are there qualifications, et cetera? And then also, to what extent has there been training, or how do our board members prepared to fill what is, really a specialized function? Thanks.
The training is extensive. And before an individual comes to the board, our initial training was done together. But now, as individuals finish their terms, then they train alone. But they have constitutional law, which is very important. And another thing, we have, when the Inspector General gives our cases, we are separated into committees. We have 3 committees. And so when we get our cases, for example, we as individuals read the cases, then we get together, other than our meeting, as committees of 3 or 4 in that committee, and we discuss them, and then we present them to the full board. So just to let you know, and in that committee, there are 3 or 4 of us. So we bring our backgrounds and our knowledge in those committees. And that's why I was saying we need that diversity. We need the police officers, the retired police officers, the criminal defense attorneys, the pastors, the LGBTQ people. We need all these, because when the officers stop individuals, when the officers don't, depending on what the situation is, everyone brings their backgrounds and helps us in making these decisions. But we have ride-alongs with the officers. That's how we learn. We have different agencies that come to us and teach us in different things. Different departments within the police department come to us and teach us. We can attend a NACO conference once a year. We get that opportunity. So we are trained. We have a training committee that trains us. Also, that she has a member of the board with other board members. We can request, for example, body cam training. We had officer from the police department will come and during our board meeting, spend an hour or whatever the necessary time is and train us there. So that, and then as far as how do we get people apply, and there's an individual in the mayor's office who determines, there are certain qualifications, and they determine who's going to be on the board, and they are interviewed. And I think you did some of the interviews. No, that wasn't you this time. Okay.
Conflict of interest.
Okay. And for example, with me, I mean, you go through, there's a written portion, and then I did it during the COVID time, and there were about 10 community people that interviewed us, and it was extensive. It was an extensive interview and background. Does that kind of answer your question a little bit?
I was going to also mention that when I first got here, one of the members of the board actually, Mark Fluharty, remember?
Mark,
He was actually understood a lot of collective bargaining agreements. So that was really good having him on it. So again, that diversity kind of helps with the members.
Right, next in the queue, I have Mr. Salt.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hendricks and Ms. Younger, for the presentation. Really appreciated it. So a couple questions. First is, what was the problem that you had that brought this about? And do you have enough data to say whether you solved it or not, whether it's complaints or what have you? And then you kind of alluded to, it sounds like the chief or the police department CPD can make an alternate determination. So therefore there must be an alternate investigation process. How do you resolve conflicts when you say one thing on fact and they say another thing?
That's yours, and I'll do the first one.
What I can tell you is being new, sometimes you gotta work out those kinks. I'll say that. One of the things, we were doing quarterly meetings, and we're still doing quarterly meetings with CPD just to understand. I can tell you initially, one of the things we did find, and that just kind of messed with our totals a little bit, is when we did an investigation, let's say excessive use of force, we might find that officers use force. And so the way that we initially started doing our findings was to say, oh, okay, it occurred. So we will exonerate the officer, but say he did follow policy and procedures. Well, CPD came back and said, hey, you can't exonerate use of force. So we don't exonerate use of force. So that kind of messed up the totals a little bit, because what they explained to us, if we're exonerating and saying that the officer did use excessive use of force, that's a violation of policy and procedure, because officers are only able to use enough force to effect the arrest. So now our findings are different. So if we get an allegation that's just force, then we'll say, okay, was force used? Yes, force was used. It was used within policy and procedure. If we get an allegation of excessive use of force, and the difference is that complaints will say, hey, this officer took me down to the ground, we think that was excessive. So when we look at it and we find that the person, let's say the person resisted and the officer just used a one level use of force, then we will unfound that, because yes, force was used, it was not excessive. And so those we were able to work out. I can say that's how we've been able to resolve that. Also, there are times that, giving you another example of a finding that we found that the officer sustained misconduct and it didn't occur. There was a policy out there when we talked to the officer was saying, hey, there was a time that when it came to traffic accidents, if it didn't involve the injury, officers did not have to complete a report. They can do exchange cards, and the citizen would actually have to complete a report. This was something that was developed during COVID, but CPD's policy still said that they had to do that. So they were like, oh no, there is a memo that's out there. So we tried to get the memo. We couldn't find it. So like I tell them, I said, well, hey, this is what the policy states. We made a recommendation to the chief to say, hey, unfortunately, we hear a lot of officers are saying there was a memo out there that told them to do this, but unfortunately, we don't have that. So what happened is we still were finding the officers sustaining from misconduct. What the chief did was eventually we got the memo. Took a while for them to find it, but then it also took the chief to revise their policy to support that. And so that was how we kind of work things out. The thing I will always tell you is we look at the policy. So we can't just go because an officer says, hey, this is what a common practice. Common practice is not policy. If the chief wants to, change a policy, support an action that they want to to do that, then they need to change that policy. So that was how we were able to resolve that.
Your first question was, why did we do the board now, right?
Yeah, pretty much what problem did you
Sorry.
solve and did you solve it?
Say that again, please. I'm sorry.
What problem were you trying to solve and do you have enough data to say you solved it or not?
Okay. The mayor thought that it was time now to review, to take a good look at the police department. An officer, okay, so an officer had never been indicted in the city of Columbus ever for behavior. There were a lot of police shootings and deaths that were happening. They just seemed to happen all at once. And the citizens were, there was citizen pressure, and that's what was going on. And the police shootings were questionable. As of right now, we have 3 or 4 trials that are awaiting, that police have been indicted for murder. Police officers have been indicted. So there have been buyouts, a lot has happened in Columbus. And our police chief has been out there with community engagement. She has, there has been such a change, and you can even feel a levity, and you can just, it is such a better, things are so much better. Not completely, things are, it's not 100%, but it's so much better because the police department, the police are out there and they're making themselves known. There's civilian police academies that are back and forth. Civilians are taking classes and they're learning. Officers are going out to the different communities and they're talking to people. They're talking to kids. There's cadets, young people. They're going out to the high schools and they're getting people interested in law enforcement from the different communities, different people interested in. And so it just came to a head, and it was time to look at everything. It was time to get minorities into the departments and then to retain them. It was time to look at the officer and make sure that you're hiring the right people and you're retaining them. So that's what happened. And then nationwide things were going on too. Okay.
Right, thank you. So I am going to pivot down to Ms. Bronga and then Mr. Martinez and then Mr. Johnson. So Ms. Bronga.
Thank you. And I really enjoyed your presentation also. Thank you for being here. One thing that stuck in my head is I felt like I heard you talk a lot about looking at the body worn camera footage. And I'm wondering, at what point are you interviewing to find out the activity that happened prior to that? Because we have a recent involved body worn camera, or police officer shooting that, it was a considerable stuff going on prior to that moment. So that's one question. The other is the budget for Columbus to have your citizen review. It looks like you have definitely more police officers per 1,000 residents. And so I'm assuming you have a larger budget there. So those are the first things that come to mind. Oh, and one last thing is, since you put this review board in play, have there been less officer involved shootings? It looked like there was 13 last year and 10 people died, but I'm not positive on that.
Involving the officer involved shooting, I would have to get back with you on that because I would definitely like to look at the stats. As far as body worn camera and interviewing officers, all the investigations that we do amount to us interviewing the officer, no matter what the body cam footage. The only time we may not interview an officer is if the body cam footage gives us enough information where we're able to make a finding. But any finding that we look at where we're sustaining misconduct, we always interview the officer and bring them in, along with interviewing the complainant. All that information is provided in a report because we need to understand that to be able to provide that information to the board for them to be able to make their finding. So it's very thorough. It's all fact-based. I always tell people nothing but the facts. No opinions. They're all based on facts, policy, and procedure. As far as the budget, our budget has grown from when I was appointed in 2022, where we started off with only, I think, a budget of might have been just a little bit over $1 million. But the mayor has knew that coming in and establishing the budget, coming in and establishing the office, obviously we would grow. And that's mainly because coming in, we started off the first year, something like almost close to 2,000 complaints that came into the office. And we were also looking at the fact that CPD, Internal Affairs, had a much larger personnel. So we came in, we looked at the amount of complaints. We come in, every complaint that we receive, we log that complaint in. What I can tell you is we're still pretty high. Whereas the first year, people didn't know initially who we were. So we had to, kind of campaign. So we got complaints from all over other agencies. Our complaint status now, usually you might see might be a little bit less, might be like 1,700, but those are a little bit more focused onto police involving CPD because they're getting to know who we are. And so they do file those complaints, and we do look at every complaint. The only thing that I will say is still the challenge is the fact that people like to file complaints and not give us enough information to conduct the investigation. So we do reach back out to the complainant at least on 3 different occasions to try to get them, however they contact us, whether it's email or letter. So if we get the information to conduct the conduct the investigation, we do. If we close it, it's because we just did not have enough information to proceed with the investigation.
So you said $1 million to start with. What are you at now?
We're a little bit over. I would have to look at, but I believe we're a little bit over 2 million. We might almost be close to 3 million for the budget. But my staff right now is at about 16 people. I have 8 investigators now. 2 are supervisor investigators. I have a community relations person. The board has a secretary that works strictly for the board that provides all of that information. The Department of Inspector General has a secretary. We also have a management analyst that handles our budget along with our stats. And we also have, besides the Inspector General and Deputy Inspector General, but we are getting ready to expand the budget because we want to bring an auditor in now to help us with collecting all of the data. The first thing I will say is, your stats are only as good as the data that you collected. So we've been in operation for over 3 years now. We have our own system, management system. So now all of that data that we've been putting in there, we're looking at analyzing that data to be able to provide some feedback, again, knowing officers, policies, and procedures.
So we just have a few more minutes. Mr. Martinez.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to extend a comment of appreciation to the Alaska Black Caucus for bringing forward these wonderful guests from Columbus, Ohio, and just to extend my word of appreciation to our guests for your work in your community and bringing your lessons and experiences to us here in Anchorage. And Chair, I wanted to extend my appreciation to you and the members of the Assembly for continuing to hold to our commitment to maintain this space, these conversations, and to supporting the community efforts toward strengthening our public safety and community relations with our law enforcement officials. So thank you. I just wanted to express that on the record.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. Looking at the report we got for 2023, and specifically on page 10 here for investigation dispositions per allegation, it looks like there's 881 allegations and then 80 sustained, so about 9%. Is that a typical rate of sustained allegations? And then with that, if it is typical or whatever the typical number is, how different is it under the IG system than it was under the previous IA system?
Well, what I can tell you is if you're asking me, is it typical? I would have to do a comparison, because I just don't have that answer. There is a report that was done by IAB, and as far as doing the comparison, I would have to look at that. I think that's a great question. One thing I can tell you that we do focus on when we're looking at the sustain is right now we really focus on whether the officers are using excessive force. Sometimes the sustain allegations right now may involve not having your body cam, use of profanity. One of the, I'm trying to figure out, I can't remember the other thing. So that's a great question. I just say we don't have that right now. What I will tell you is as we are collecting data, our next annual report that we'll be putting out for 2024 is going to have some more in-depth information because we want to use our own data that we're collecting and not data that was collected by CPD.
Okay, thanks. And I understand that maybe it's a complex question, but sort of what I'm driving at is, are we getting the same result just through a different process, essentially? And it sounds like maybe we can't answer that here, but it's one that I'm chewing on.
All right, Mr. Rivera, you're last. Thank you. Sure.
So were you asking, giving complaints to internal affairs versus giving complaints to the inspector general? Are they the same? Are we getting the same results? In what way? Are you asking monetarily or for
I
the?
guess what I'm asking is if we say in a typical year, 9% of the allegations of misconduct are substantiated, is that how it was under the previous system, or has it noticeably changed what the determination is, right? I mean, are you guys finding different results in terms of whether or not misconduct occurred based on the way you're going about investigating it versus how it was done prior?
Okay. See, this is the first inspector general that we've ever had, so I'm not sure that the citizens of Columbus went to IA for excessive use of, they may have for some excessive use of force, but for misconduct. I'm not sure that they thought they had a place to go because that's they had no place to go. Internal affairs only investigated, you only went there for certain things, and we're different here. So I don't know that you can compare that.
Yeah, and I think the answer is more complicated than can be answered with the data that you have.
Yeah,
Because of a number
yeah.
of factors, and it's an interesting question, and I think maybe crafting it in writing might be a helpful way to approach it because you can probably get back to us.
One thing I can comment is when you look at some of the policies that have been implemented, I don't know if CPD would have ever thought about putting body cam on their special duty officers. Special duties are a separate assignment. They collect a different pay for that, and the tools they use are still full city tools. They're still a uniform city card. So I don't know if CPD would have ever thought about that. But again, based on the Civilian Review Board, now we have that. Now they're looking and they're funding some of that different things. One of the other things that's different, I know, is when it comes to the policy involving clothing a citizen. They had an incident where officers responded. Citizen was unclothed. It was a B&E in progress. The officers took the citizen, although they put them in the car, they did not clothe them at that time. Even though the officer didn't violate a policy and procedure, Civilian Review Board recommended that CPD look at possibly, clothing an individual, and that is something that they're doing. These are things that, as an officer, they may focus more on their actions and what they do. The Civilian Review Board doesn't just look at the officer's actions, they actually look at citizens too. How is this action that interaction going to work with citizens, giving citizens their respect? So I do think there is a place we're making a difference that, before may not have been made a difference. And I think that's what the board member was saying, because CPD was doing the investigation and that a separate entity doing the investigation. And I know we're running out of time. So.
Yeah. Mr. Rare, a brief one?
Yeah, so I'm not gonna ask you a substantive question. I will ask though, because I'm sure other members have more questions I do. Is there an avenue or an opportunity where we can send our questions in writing and you can respond in writing and then we can get that posted on the work session page or wherever public place so folks are in the loop on that? Is that something that you'd be willing to do?
I would say, since I know we were invited by the Black Caucus, I would say if you would just make sure you send everything to them and then they can handle whatever questions that you have, and then they'll be able to forward that. And would love to be able to respond to any additional questions. that you
Great,
have.
thanks.
And so I'll just offer you last minute before we conclude, if you don't walk us out the door and say anything else.
I just want to thank you. Really appreciate civilian oversight is very important. I think they play a very important part. I will say that not just being a former law enforcement officer, but being somebody that actually was on both sides of the badge, being a law enforcement officer and working internal affairs and working the Department of Inspector General. There is a place for both, so it is very important.
Internal Affairs likes the fact that the Inspector General is here, and Internal Affairs sends them investigations. Fire Department has sent them investigations. We've reviewed them. Internal Affairs will review like a misdemeanor offense or some sort of a criminal offense, and then they'll say, well, let's send it over to the Inspector General. And that makes it clean and it makes it transparent. And it's really, law enforcement likes it because it keeps it, it makes them, the community likes it. It makes them credible in front of the community. It's more professional. So anyway, that's it. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you, everybody. We will now adjourn. We're going to be back, but I'm going to kick us off at 1:15 as opposed to at 10 after. So we'll go ahead and take a few-minute break. We have one more